Good morning and welcome to The Crawl, the show where we break down the future of search, brand authority, and everything else AI is rewriting about digital marketing. I'm Tristan Harris, your host, and today we're sitting down with Barbara Roos, founder and principal of the Trailhead Communications, to talk about shifting and expanding your mindset with AI. Barbara Rose is a leadership and change partner for organizations navigating high stakes transformation, especially where AI, culture, and human dynamics determine whether change sticks. Known for constructively challenging assumptions, she helps leaders see around corners, surfacing cultural, trust, and behavioral shifts that make or break AI and transformation initiatives. Her strength lies in synthesis, distilling complexity into clear, practical direction and narratives that build alignment across diverse teams. She blends analytical rigor with emotional intelligence, asking the questions others often overlook, connecting dots across silos, and helping people see their role in the larger system of change. At Intel, Barbara led enterprise scale transformation initiatives affecting thousands of employees, built a global change champion network, and created change playbooks and communication strategies that help leaders drive clarity through rapid shifts in strategy and technology. Today, she partners with leaders who are under pressure to turn AI from experiment into outcomes, aligning vision, ways of working, and communication so teams adopt new tools with confidence instead of with fatigue and resistance. Rooted in the Pacific Northwest, Barbara has spent countless hours on the trail, and that spirit of exploration and resilience shapes how she leads high stakes change. Through Trailhead Communication, she helps leaders and teams do the same, navigate uncertainty, stay aligned on the path, and move forward with clarity and confidence. So, Barbara, thank you so much for being here today with us. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Tristan.
Of course, we can kind of dive right in. One of the things that I really want to start with is the idea of shifting your mindset around AI. So, what have you seen? Just the average mindset around AI is, and what does shifting that mindset really mean to you?
I think, I mean, I don't know that there's any one average mindset. That there's a spectrum, but I think most people that I encounter, whether they're really enthusiastic and early adopters of AI, or whether they're a little bit more reluctant, everybody's concerned about what it's going to mean for people, for society, for job security, um, and and I think that's natural to have that fear. But I think the fundamental thing I would talk about in shifting your mindset is really trying to focus on the potential and the power of AI plus human ingenuity, and to lean in and be involved in shaping what AI becomes and how it impacts our society versus sitting back and passively being fearful or observing and hoping that it doesn't end up being the things that you're afraid of.
Yeah, that's a common theme we've heard from quite a few of our guests on the podcast is uh, the big concerns are this is a changing technology. I don't understand it. I'm worried that it's going to impact my role or my position. And that kind of shift from viewing it as a threat to an opportunity or a tool for augmentation rather than replacement is kind of the common theme we've seen of suggestions that people in situations and positions like you and I have for people is learn how to use it. It really does help augment what you're doing. And obviously, with your work at Trailhead, you kind of help lead that charge and help people kind of get to that point and clean up some of the messy integration portion, right?
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
yeah, and that's, like I said, that's a really common fear or misconception that people have about embracing AI. Are there any other common misconceptions that people have?
Um, I think that um, I think that there's perhaps a misconception that what it is today is all that it is. I run into people. It's so funny when I talk to somebody who tried it to solve a problem once. It didn't work the way they wanted it to, so they walked away from it. and said, I can do this better myself rather than spend the time teaching the AI how to do this. But the thing is, because the technology is evolving so rapidly, um, I think that the investment of energy in it, I kind of equate it a little bit to like getting a summer intern on your team. So anybody who's had an intern knows if they're just there for the summer and that's the end of it, you're probably not going to get as much value out of them as they get out of the experience of the internship, and
Yeah,
that's okay, right? I
yeah.
mean, internship programs are in large part to benefit the interns, but if you think of AI more like they're starting with an internship, but they're going to be an employee here that's with you for their entire career, and what you're investing in it now is going to reap dividends later, you start to shift your mindset around it a little bit, because my experience with AI has been that when I have ongoing conversations with it, and when I say conversations, I'm usually typing. I'm not as inclined to do text to or voice to text, but you can do that too. But having conversations and kind of teaching it what you're about, what you care about, what your business, your job, et cetera, are about, it starts to learn and get smarter and grows with you, and you start to learn too. So you learn the limitations of a given tool. You learn what type of prompting helps it be better, helps the output be stronger, and as you're learning together, you're growing together. And so that investment early on in your AI intern ends up, being really worthwhile.
I absolutely love that explanation. I think that that makes it a lot easier for a lot of people to understand because, yeah, summer interns are there for them, right? But, and a lot of times you're, helping them and you're not necessarily investing as much as you would if they were going to be a long term employee. So I think that's a really good call out. And I think too that just getting comfortable with prompting is so important for most people when you first start out. If you take it, like I'm going to give it one shot, like, yeah, you're probably not asking things the right way, or you're not, setting things up properly in Claude and trying to run things, build out like a tool or something like that. A lot of that learning isn't necessarily like on the agent AI side, it's on your own side. It's getting comfortable with the tools and learning how best to use them and influence them to get to the kind of output that you want. So I absolutely love that description. I think that's really apt, and it helps kind of connect that to a lot of a common theme that people see at work.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think that metaphor of AI as an employee, you can kind of carry it a lot further than just the intern angle, right?
Mhm.
Every AI tool is a different employee in a way, and each of them has their strengths and their weaknesses. So you might think, for example, ChatGPT and Claude and Perplexity, they're all LLMs, they're probably pretty similar, but I've found them each to have different strengths,
Yep.
and I turn to them for different tasks, and how I communicate with them is also a little bit different. I know that what I feed into ChatGPT and what I feed into Perplexity needs to be a little bit different. And again, as you work with them more and more, you start to understand those nuances.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's certain things that I'll go to ChatGPT for over going to Claude for, and vice versa. So if I'm trying to create a interactive dashboard analyzing a big data set to show off, key wins to the exec team, I'm going to go to Claude for that because it just is a better use case for me. And, I'm comfortable with it and have learned how to do that,
Yeah.
So I think that that brings up an interesting question in that are there any like practical exercises or strategies that you would recommend individuals to do to expand their mindset around AI adoption?
Yeah. I mean, I think starting with, small tasks and exercises, and maybe like every week take on a new challenge, don't try to do everything all at once, all the time, like that movie, whatever it was called. Um,
I think
you
that
know,
was it. I think that was the title.
okay, I nailed it. um, but take on a little project, and then something that I find surprisingly helpful is enlisting the AI in your learning. So um, asking it, like, I will, if I'm working on, like, the other day I was writing a case study, and I thought back to everything I could remember about this particular project that I had worked on, and I just did a massive brain dump into ChatGPT, and told it everything I could remember, attached some files with some data points and so forth, and but instead of saying write the case study based on what I've given you, I said, I would like your help in writing this case study. Look at everything I've given you, and then ask me questions for additional information that would be helpful to produce the best possible case study. And it came back with like 20 questions that were really good questions. And then I spent, another 30, 40 minutes writing out answers to all of those questions and tracking down information that would be helpful, gave it that, and the case study it produced was really good, so much better than I know it could have done with what I started with. And so asking it, what else would you ask me
Hmm.
in order to be successful, I think can be really transformative, because the reality is, my experience with most AI tools is they're not inclined to tell you their blind spots and their
Yeah.
gaps. They're fundamentally designed to do what you ask them to do. So if you give them incomplete information and ask them to do something, they're going to do their best with what they've got. But if you ask them to tell you what they're missing, they'll tell you. So you kind of need to bring that critical thinking and questioning lens. But then when you prompt it to do that, it's really good with what it gives back to you.
I wrote that down. I love that trick. I hadn't thought of doing that. And, we use, obviously, I'm a SVP of marketing. We produce a lot of case studies and we use AI to help us analyze the data we're putting in and kind of like surface, the top level, best, most exciting things. I had never thought of saying, ask me 20 questions or 10 questions that can help us make this case study better and more punchy and, kind of highlight some of the wins that we've had. So I think that's fantastic. And I actually made a note of I need to do this. So that's fantastic. I love it.
Well,
Um,
and also when you're starting doing something, obviously, whether it's something you've done before, like a case study, and you should know how to do it, and yet
yeah,
still sometimes you don't always think through all the steps. But especially when you're doing something you haven't done before, instead of just diving into the doing, stop and ask AI for some help on how you should approach it. So I used one of my AI tools to help me build a rather complex leadership alignment workshop, and I had an idea of how I wanted the workshop to flow, what topics I wanted to cover in it, but creating a half day workshop is a pretty robust project, right?
yeah,
And
of course.
so the first thing I did was I asked AI, what steps would you take to build this out? How would you phase out this work?
Mhm.
And let's build an outline of the process we're going to take to do this. Then I copied what it came out with into a separate document, and then started to kind of methodically go through each of the steps. Um, my experience with AI has been that if you try to do an overly complex project all at once, it kind of like can lose the thread somewhere along the way. But by asking it to map out a complex process, it thought about that, gave me a really good outline, and then I kept us on track working against that outline over multiple days. So I would, get maybe 25% of the way through it, step away from the work because I'd get mentally fatigued and I was ready for a break, come back the next day and say, okay, yesterday we left off here. Now let's pick up and move on to the next step that you had outlined. And so having it help me plan the work, not just execute the work, was really valuable.
That's a common theme that I've seen as well is that when you try to do a very complex project and you just say run with it, you're going to run into pitfalls. It's going to lose that thread along the way. Um, that step by step, kind of holding it to the outline and keeping it not honest, but keeping it on track, I think is something that people pick up on pretty quickly when they start digging into utilizing AI. Because I think everybody first time is like, do this giant thing, run with it, and then they're like, wait, no, like you got partway there, and then you kind of ran off into the weeds. So I
Yep.
think that's a really good point. So something that you have over at Trailhead, one of the things that you guys talk about is navigating AI with clarity and purpose. And I know that you partner with executives to kind of navigate that messy reality of AI transformation. When it comes to that transformation, what can things like managers or directors or upper management do to help coach their team through that AI adoption process?
So much they can do. First of all, I think number one, it starts with clarity and alignment on what it is that you're trying to do with AI. I encourage leadership teams to have a conversation, go around in a circle, or check in with everybody independently and ask, um, what what are you trying to accomplish with the adoption of AI in your organization? And more often than not, if you ask five different leaders, you're going to get five different answers. And often it's from the lens of what their responsibility is that they're
Their
thinking
specific
about it.
role.
So the CFO's version of that versus the head of IT versus the head of marketing, they're all going to have a different take on what the mission is. And that inconsistency can lead to confusion and distrust with employees.
Mhm.
Um, and I think you also need to have clarity on ultimately, as your organization invests in and grows with AI, what are you doing as a result of that? Is it, you're looking for efficiencies so you can reduce the number of employees? Is it you're looking to encourage innovative thinking and growth? Is it, that you're trying to free up people from mundane tasks so that they can focus on higher order, more strategic thinking? There's lots of different things that an organization can do with the gains from AI. Um, if you're not articulating your intent with your employees and addressing it proactively, they're going to fill in the blanks on that story. And it's probably not going to be the most positive possibilities because they're going to be hearing all the coverage about layoffs and,
Yep.
and job reductions, and they're going to assume the worst. So, for organizations that intend to reinvest that growth into their employees and to continue to advance people's careers and grow their employees with AI adoption, say it,
Mhm.
address the fears, get ahead of that because it'll create such a different culture and mindset, so that people aren't quietly resisting because they're coming at it from a place of fear.
Yeah, and I think I've got a very pertinent example on my team. One of my employees is incredibly talented at like a high level strategy thinking side, but has been always put into I have to get all this work done. I have to do all this, all these mundane tasks, right? So their adoption of AI has allowed them to not only free up their time, but allowed them to focus on areas that to me as a manager is, makes them much more valuable to myself and my team and the company as well. So I think that idea of being able to utilize it to help employees grow is incredibly important. And I think that that's the way that that should be looked at. I mean, you look at, I referenced this once or twice on the podcast, but I think it was Twitter or X now. They laid off a lot of their developers and then they hired them all back quietly, like 2 or 3 months later, right? Because they realize, wait a second, maybe we can't just have AI do all of this, right? And I think the sweet spot is being able to improve efficiency and output and allow the actual employees to be able to direct things at a higher level than they necessarily can do if they're bogged down in time consuming tasks day in and day out.
Yeah, and the story, about X hiring people back, I hear that time and time again, where I think, the job that people do on paper and the job that they actually do day in and day out can be really different.
Yeah,
And, when you look up the layers of leadership, the people who are often making the decisions about these job cuts don't necessarily have that visibility into the fact that an employee, may be tasked to do X, Y, and Z, but the average employee often sees the gaps and, um, you know, is trying to do the right thing for the company, and
yeah,
so they'll fill in little gaps in an unofficial capacity, and that becomes connective tissue that's really important to how an organization operates, even though it's not written down. And so when you lose that talent because you didn't understand all of that connective tissue that was there, you know, it starts to become apparent over time. So a lot of companies are hiring people back, and I love that those people are often negotiating better pay in the process because they deserve to.
more power to them. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that if you look at, I think anybody listening, look at your job description from when you got hired and compare that to what you actually do on a day to day basis. The difference is that connective tissue. And I think that that is a really unique way of looking at it that I hadn't thought of. And I think that's a beautiful way of saying it because, yeah, most employees are trying to do the right thing for the company and they're trying to influence areas outside of necessarily their, narrow job description. So I think that if you look at it with a lens of, well, X role only does Y, so we can automate that. Well, realistically, I don't think anybody is only doing what they were hired to do, right? I don't think
yeah,
I've ever seen that in, my career. So,
yeah.
um,
And then I do want to go back to your earlier question about what leaders and managers can do, because another thing that I think is really important is role modeling the behavior yourself. So if a leader is listening to Wall Street talk about how great AI is and how much it can save them, and they're asking their organization to adopt it, but they aren't really versed in the technology themselves. There's going to be a gap between their idea of what it makes possible and the reality. And they're also going to struggle to inspire their employees, because that gap is going to be noticeable to employees. And so
absolutely.
I think every leader and manager needs to be using the technology themselves, and if they can't really think of how it might apply to them, first of all, give me 5 minutes with them because I'll have a million ideas. But also, they need to be, walking the walk every day.
Yeah.
Like, when they're in a quarterly all hands, they need to talk about how they're using AI to help themselves make strategic decisions, to analyze data, to um, you know, question assumptions. All of the things that a leader does day in and day out in their job can be complemented by AI, and then they can show that and bring it to life. Same thing with the managers.
Yeah, that's held true even in the pre-AI era, right? Like people want to see the people leading them be in the trenches with them, to an
Yeah,
extent. And I think that that idea of the disconnect between what AI can do and, if you just hear about it, well, you're listening to the marketing, first of all, that people like OpenAI are putting out. And, they're selling you the moon, right? They're saying it can do everything. Why would you ever need anything else? Where in, you know, reality, it's a little bit different. You need to get hands on with it to really understand its capabilities. And, something you mentioned earlier on is the capabilities are changing frequently and the technology is evolving. So keeping up with that is incredibly important for anybody in a management position because it allows you to be strategic and help your team figure out areas that they can improve and help you improve your department, your company overall as a whole. And I think that's incredibly important.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the people who are doing the work are the ones that are most equipped to understand how AI can best be applied to that work.
Mhm.
Anybody that's sitting outside of the job, just like a senior leader doesn't know the specifics, that connective tissue that we talked about earlier of all the different things a person does in their day-to-day job, they also can't then, even if they are deeply versed in AI, they can't necessarily figure out exactly how to apply it to a specific person's role. It takes that person understanding the use cases that would be relevant in their job and testing and experimenting and iterating with it, and then that becomes all the more powerful when you're doing it as a team,
Yeah.
right? Because a team kind of knows, they may not know everything about what each other does, but they know enough. And then if they're talking about it regularly, if they're sharing their learnings, what pain points that, like, what did they try that didn't work and why didn't it work? Does somebody else have an idea of how to do it differently that might be better? Oh, I tried this thing this week, and Jim, this might apply to, this thing that you were struggling with last week. So that collective learning and sharing really can catalyze growth for a team. And I think that's something a lot of organizations are struggling with right now, because a lot of AI use is happening at the individual level
Mhm.
and the experimentation is happening at the individual level. And I think to break through and scale AI adoption, it's really going to take creating a culture of experimentation and shared learning.
That's a very good point. And I wanted to pick your brain on what role like ongoing training and support plays um, in AI adoption. But something that you mentioned there kind of brings up another idea of how often do you run like team workshops, so to speak? So things like getting a marketing department, getting the directors together to sit there and figure out like, okay, how can we use this for digital PR, for content, for outreach, for creating collateral, for design, and kind of work together with them, because you're right, something you said there is very important. We might not all know the very deep specifics of each other's role, but working together with each other, especially for as long as, a lot of teams have been together, you learn capabilities and you learn what people are good at and what areas you can help them. So being able to do that team setting, is that something that you run a lot? Is that something that you see often and kind of the output of that?
I think a workshop can be a great catalyzing moment, but to be honest, over reliance on workshops on an ongoing basis isn't what I'd recommend, because it does feel like a workshop is this thing that stands alone. And what you really want is to build the learning and the usage and the sharing into your everyday culture. So whatever the pace looks like for your organization, I've worked with organizations who will do, a Friday lunch and learn as a standing thing, where everybody comes in and just talks about, like, here's what I did this week, here's what I experimented with, and shares, and maybe somebody will demo something. Um, I Other organizations do a daily 15-minute stand up. They
Mhm.
want that level of frequency because they're growing and iterating with the technology so fast that waiting an entire week for learning is too much. There are gonna be organizations that are much further at the other end of the spectrum, right? Like, maybe a monthly or a quarterly would be a good fit for them, and that's okay. But you wanna find ways to build it into your everyday interactions. So if you have a weekly staff meeting, if you have, quarterly all hands, like, you should be looking for just ways to bring it into every, aspect of how you operate on a regular basis. And then the other thing is, I think it's really important for managers to be reinforcing the right behaviors on an ongoing basis. So, you know, when a manager gives kudos to somebody because they did something well, are they focusing on legacy reward notions like, calling out somebody because they produced X number of campaigns,
Mhm.
or they came up with a great new customer story, or are they calling out that somebody experimented with a new tool and helped find an efficiency that is going to benefit the team? So, thinking about changing reward systems and acknowledgement and things that affect people's motivations, I think is just as important as the actual learning and sharing in and of itself.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point is, one of the things that as a leader in any company you need to do is kind of track and measure employee output. And, it's important to give recognition where recognition is due. So how how do you kind of adjust that? And how can leaders measure whether their employees are adapting their mindset and skills effectively alongside AI implementation?
Yeah, I mean, mindset is hard to measure, right? It's a little bit of one of those, you know it when you see it kind of
Mhm.
things. But I would encourage HR teams to be thinking about the official reward systems, and how you shift away, not entirely, but at least evolve and shift some of the rewards toward more team results versus individual results, and more learning and sharing, because those are things that have not traditionally been rewarded in most companies. Like when we get to our annual reviews, most of us, if you write up like your brag sheet, right?
Mhm.
It's, I did all of these things. I achieved these outcomes. I result.
Yes.
And it it's not that common to be bragging about, I tried, I experimented, I failed, I
Mhm.
iterated, I learned, as well as I shared, I helped,
Mhm.
I contributed to team growth. And as we get more and more to a place where, the volume of output is so much driven by AI and not by the human, measuring what we produced becomes less and less important, right? Measuring how we did the work, um, how we contributed to the overall good and results of the organization becomes a lot more important. And so that needs to be addressed in our formal reward systems as well as our informal recognition systems.
Yeah, and I think that's a very valid call out. So I've, as you can imagine in my role, I've done a lot of check-ins and, annual reviews, and I can probably count on one hand how many times I've seen somebody say something like, "I've learned X, I tried X, I experimented with Y." And I, very specifically foster a culture of try new things, experiment, break it. If it doesn't work, we've at least learned something valuable, right?
Yeah.
So, and even then, that's something that not a lot of people have ever been like, I had 18 failed experiments, like that's you're right. It's very much I did this and why was the output and this is why it's good. So I think that reframing that mindset of it's good to try new things. Failure in, an experiment or pushing something that you're doing isn't necessarily failure or indicative of them as, an employee. Like it's good to try new things. And especially in, the rapidly changing era we're in right now with AI, it's very good to keep trying new things. And it's very good to push. And, not all of them will be successful, but the ones that are will have an oversized impact. And that's what is going to be, moving the needle. And you can't really get to that unless you're doing the experiments and you're trying and not necessarily succeeding every time, but you're learning through the process.
And I think also it's redefining what is success and
Hmm.
failure. Because if the only definition of success is that, this thing worked and then you were able to scale it and a lot of people use it now, um, it's a pretty narrow definition, right? But if one of the success metrics might be, did we learn something critical that then changed how we approached the next experiment? So if you have, 5 employees who experimented and tried something, but one of them, through their failure, gleaned a really important insight that then shaped how you approach this going forward, you want to highlight that and shine a light on that, right?
Hmm.
Because that insight and that critical thinking, that analysis and learning and iteration, that's the behavior you're looking for that's going to help catalyze growth in your organization.
Yeah, and if you look at a historical example, the Wright brothers' first plane didn't fly, right? But they learned that they needed to adjust the shape of the wings to provide more lift, and that's very much the same thing here. Is experiment, try, learn, iterate, and that's the path towards success. So, how can to jump to another question? How can companies kind of adapt their approach iteratively over time as AI tools and capabilities evolve? So we've talked a lot about how things evolve quickly. What can companies specifically do to kind of future proof against that, or to kind of make sure that they're ready to adapt and evolve alongside?
Um, I mean, a couple things come to mind. One is creating change champion networks, empowering people on the ground to be officially champions of change as part of their roles, and to be um, nurturing that experimentation and growth, so that it's not a one-time moment. Because I do see examples of organizations where they get really excited and gung-ho for a short period of time, but then people revert back to old behaviors. And
Hmm.
so
Yeah.
you need to have people who are committed to the cause, and you need to be involving both enthusiasts and your more reluctant skeptics in that process, because they all bring really important perspective and balance. If you only have enthusiasts leading the charge, those people inherently have a little bit of a blind spot. They won't understand why some people aren't adopting, or aren't succeeding in their use of the technology, because they're always so eager to try new things. They're always so
Hmm.
curious that they don't really necessarily understand people who aren't that way. So you need to have the spectrum of people involved. And then, less on the people side, so not my area of specialty here, because I don't do the tech stack side. But I do think, getting your data systems connected, and getting your collective organizational data in a place where it's more AI friendly, and then breaking down some of the organizational silos that exist in many companies. Um, y- to have AI really transform a company at the biggest levels, you have to have visibility into data across the organization. So I see some companies having kind of outdated mindsets of, well, IT sits over here and marketing sits over here. And they don't necessarily think that marketing needs a seat at that table, right? Um, but in actuality, for marketing to really leverage AI effectively, you need a very complete view of the entire customer experience end to end. So that might include support data. It might include financial data. It might include just all kinds of things that marketing typically hasn't had access to. And that's just marketing as an example. I think that most functions, if you gave them the chance to articulate it, could tell you why having a more complete picture of what's going on in the business would help their function as well. And so I think organizations of the future that really embrace AI are going to be operating more cross-functionally and more collaboratively, and that takes both organizational change and system level change, so that you can really unleash AI more powerfully.
I 100% spot on. Just the marketing example alone, I've lived for the last year, kind of going and collecting that data and getting access to things and making sure that we can tie absolutely everything together in a way that allows us to kind of leverage things from a much higher level. So I think that's absolutely spot on, and I would be very surprised if other departments aren't the same. So uh, that's just a great point. Um, Coming up to kind of like the final wrap up question, is there any kind of final piece of advice that you would give to individuals and organizations that are looking to embrace AI successfully? We covered a few kind of what I would say is more like foundational things, but if you had to wrap it all up into one piece of advice, what would it be?
Get in the game,
Yeah.
I think um, it's surprising how many people aren't there yet, because those of us who are using this technology day in and day out, like we start to live and breathe it, and it becomes, part of our everyday vernacular, and it sort of boggles the mind, like, oh wait, there are people and companies who aren't doing this at all. What? That's how is that
Yeah.
possible? But there are a lot, and so at the organizational level, I would say if you're not thinking about how to address AI as a strategy, um, first of all, breaking news, your employees are doing it already. There's shadow
Mhm.
AI happening everywhere, and that's introducing risk to your organization, because you're not setting guardrails and parameters.
Mhm.
And so you need to, at the very least, lay some rules of the road down. But also, if you are a traditional organization that's not using AI, you have a very high risk of being displaced by a company that's, AI born. And the opportunity for you to differentiate is, not to try to be the same as an AI, first company, but rather to bring the combination of AI and your employees, which are the differentiator that you have. You have employees who have experience, wisdom, instinct that these AI upstarts don't have. And so if you can combine the power of your people with the power of AI, you have something really compelling, but only if you actually start doing it, right? Like if you
Yeah.
wait too long, you are under real competitive threat. Um, and then at the individual level, I would encourage everyone to be experimenting with this technology and recognizing that the more you get in there and try it, the more you're going to understand it, the more you can
Mhm.
get ahead of potential risk. If you're afraid that it's going to be a threat to you, know your enemy, right? But I think you're going to find that it has a lot of power, and that you can grow and advance with it, in ways you're not anticipating. It's not this futuristic, hard, complex technology, um, and I think it's especially important for women and minorities to be adopting this technology, because if it's just tech bros defining it, it's going to be, similar to, like, if you when railroad systems were built out, if only a certain set of people decided where to lay the tracks, well, then the rest of us are riding the rails on the routes that they defined. And
Yes.
so, a as, an underrepresented voice, get in here, use the technology, find the shortcomings, and be part of the user base, because at the end of the day, the companies that develop these technologies, they're gonna respond to the people that are using them. So if you're one of those people, your needs are going to be part of the calculus that they're doing on where they put their energy and what they develop. And so it's important to be present and not let this technology only represent tech bros.
Yes, 100%. And uh, I like the analogy of, if they're the only ones laying the track, then you're paying to ride the rails at that point. So yeah, that is absolutely important. It's something that we're actively trying to find more less tech broy voices for our podcast here as an example. But it's very very important that everybody is has a voice there and kind of to go back to how you started that, get in the game. So thank you very much for joining us today, Barbara. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your incredibly busy schedule to come and talk, AI adoption with us. Before we close out, I like to give guests an opportunity to kind of tell people where they can find them. So, you have trailheadcommunications.com, but is there any social media you'd like to plug or anything like that?
I'm kind of old school. I'm just on LinkedIn. I don't have 17 different social channels. So feel free to find me on LinkedIn, Barbara Rose, Roos, and Trailhead Communications. And if you're interested in these topics, I'd love to talk.
Awesome. Thank you again, Barbara. And everybody listening, if you like this episode, please make sure to do the whole thing that I hate to say every time: hit follow, leave a review. And as always, if you can comment on any topics you'd like us to cover, that really helps us in planning our content for the future to make sure that it is serving kind of the needs and interests of our audience. So thank you very much, Barbara. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Tristan.